My friends, welcome tonight, and thank you for being here. It is Sunday night, December 27th, 2020, and this is the Glenn Rawson Stories Devotional. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. I hope that the memories you made with your family were something to last a lifetime, and I hope that the Spirit of the Lord was with you. As for those of us here in the Rawson household, we had some of our children that made it home for Christmas, and we spent a lot of time playing, laughing, playing games till 2 o'clock in the morning, eating wonderful food, and just having a lot of fun. There is just nothing quite like this season. As we begin tonight, I want to remind you one more time, please feel free to make comments. Leave a comment on the page. If you have not yet liked or followed the Facebook page that you're watching, please do so. If this is your first time on one of these devotionals, tell us who you are and where you're watching from and how many are watching. Those comments are always appreciated. I wanted to remind you also tonight that something I told you before, that those of you that like history from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church history, that History of the Saints will be launching its podcast on January 4th with the first season of Foundations of the Restoration about the prophet Joseph Smith. It's the very beginnings of LDS history. Now there are 6 episodes of that season that are already available at anchor.fm/History of the Saints. That's the podcast anchor, as it were, where you can begin to watch that. And from there, you can go to iTunes and Spotify and others. Again, that website where you can begin listening to these History of the Saints podcasts is anchor.fm/History of the Saints. I'll repeat that later on in the broadcast tonight so that you have it. Now, I know that Christmas is past, but the warmth of Christmas is like a good warm stove. The warmth just lingers. There's one more Christmas story I would like to share with you. And the year 2020 has seen a lot of this and this issue, and people have been very concerned about it. And so I felt like perhaps this story would be appropriate. Does God care about human freedom, whether it be in America or anywhere else? Does He care about human freedom? Can a man be saved in the kingdom of God while in bondage on earth? Now, these are important questions. By the way of an answer, I want to tell you of an unusual Christmas story. It was December 1776. The tattered remnants of George Washington's Continental Army were camped in the open on the banks of the Delaware River, where once they had been some 20,000 in number, bold and strong. Now Washington's army is less than 6,000. Where once they had soundly defeated the British at Lexington and Concord, now they were a decimated band of rabble, running for their lives across the frozen New Jersey landscape, with the British in hot and humiliating pursuit. And now, here they were, huddled around the fires on the Delaware River to keep from freezing. Their rations were reduced to starvation subsistence, even some of them living on tree bark. Their inadequate clothing was nothing more than filthy rags hanging on emaciated bodies. They were dejected and defeated, as beaten psychologically as they had been so physically. And yet, for all of us moderns now, on this ragtag group of men, hung all the hopes of the American Revolution. This is the army of the Revolution. They are all that stand between America and avowed British tyranny. Consider, if you will, General Washington. At this time, he was about as burdened a man as ever lived. Many were calling for his resignation, even within the Continental Congress. Officers under his own command were openly murmuring against him and positioning to replace him. Desertions within the ranks of his army were rampant and daily. And here he stands on the banks of the Delaware with an army too weak to fight, feeling the weight and carrying the blame of the American plight. Meanwhile, across the river in Trenton, safe and warm, are the Hessian mercenaries left by General Howe to hold Washington's pitiful army at bay. Now, he could have finished them off at any time, but it was widely known at the time that on December 31st, the enlistments of Washington's army would expire. His men would simply go home. The British saw no need to attack and finish Washington and his army off. Cold, starvation, desertion, that would finish the fight for them. All the British and the Germans needed to do was sit and watch while the American Revolution collapsed upon itself, and the dream, that arrogant dream of American freedom, would die with it. It was a monumental, historical moment. So much hinged on the decisions made now. At one of the lowest points, Thomas Paine came into camp, talking and mingling with the soldiers. He was deeply moved by their plight and sat down and, according to some, penned a pamphlet called The American Crisis, written, it is said, on the head of a drum. These are some of those words he wrote at that critical time. Quote, These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. End of quote. Those words, once published, ran like a storm across America. To the credit of the man and the power of heaven that moved him, George Washington was inspired by those words and by the powers of heaven. He was inspired. He did not lie down in defeat as so many would. He rose from his knees, gathered his ragged and beaten army, and in the face of a terrible howling blizzard, crossed the Delaware on Christmas night 1776. Several thousand men, cannon, and horses were ferried across the ice-choked black waters of the Delaware. From there, Washington marched his men 9 miles to Trenton, leaving, it is said, bloody footprints in the snow as they went. In weather literally so cold that men froze to death when they sat down. At dawn, Washington did the impossible with the seemingly incapable. He attacked Trenton and the unsuspecting Hessians and captured the men and the city and lost not a single man in the battle. Inspired by that timely victory, the faltering fight for American freedom regained its momentum. Men re-enlisted, volunteers came, allies joined, and the battle for American freedom went on to victory. General Washington, over the next few days, captured Princeton and sufficient supplies to carry his men through the winter, safely quartered at Morristown. But think about that moment when it would have been so easy to give up the fight and quit. Thank God for that man. Thank God for all those men. Little did they know how much their sacrifice would change the course of human history and change our lives now. With all my soul, I tell you, the cause of freedom and liberty is the cause of Christ. His birth signaled the opening of the prison doors, here and hereafter. No man, no woman can be saved in bondage, political, or freedom. The shackles must come off. We must be free in heart, mind, and in person. We must choose God and be agents unto ourselves, or we cannot be saved. Praise be to God for an oft-forgotten Christmas gift given by humble men and women at a terrible cost. Thanks be to God for what we have. And once again, and for the last time this season, Merry Christmas. Now, a few days ago, I was standing in my kitchen, looking to the south through the sliding glass door. Right outside, I noticed a bird just a few feet away on the edge of the grass, very close to the house. He caught my attention because, first of all, he was a big, beautiful bird, and second, he was acting really, really weird. The tinted glass door prevented him from seeing me, but I could see him clearly. So I moved closer and I stood watching him. His bill was about 2 inches long, pointed, and he kept poking it into the ground almost all the way to his eyes. He would thrust the bill in, pull it out, and do it again and again and again. He did it so fast, I wondered to myself, what in the world is this bird doing? Every so often, he would shove his bill in the ground and give his head a twist and a flip, and dirt and debris would go flying. I was so captured watching him. The entire time was probably several minutes. I stood there watching him while he hopped around my lawn exhibiting this strange behavior. I thought to myself, is he feeding? But if he is, how in the world could he know what's down 2 inches into that frozen ground? On and on that bird went, poking holes in my lawn like a feathered aerator. Finally, he flew off, and I stood there musing at his curious behavior. Well, you know me, I'm a man of simple mind. His antics kept bothering me. Why? Finally, I got on the computer and I looked him up. Turns out that bird was a northern flicker, a species of woodpecker. I learned that he is one of the few woodpeckers that feeds on the ground as well as in the trees. In fact, it is said up to 45% of the flicker's diet can come from ants and their larvae, which he digs out of the ground with his bill. Moreover, the article said that the flicker's tongue can project up to 2 inches off the end of his bill in the capture of prey. And he has often been observed pecking at the ground the way other woodpeckers peck at trees. That was it. My friend the flicker was feeding. It was lunchtime right outside my kitchen. Right where he was pecking the ground is where huge colonies of ants lived last summer. Now, I know you think that I've beat my head against a wall one too many times, but a point came to me. When I first saw that bird, he made absolutely no sense at all. His erratic actions seemed to lack all judgment and reason. He just looked, well, crazy. But it turned out I was the one who was misjudging. He knew exactly what he was doing and was doing that which nature had programmed to do for his winter survival and sustenance. Smart bird. Now the point. We are like that flicker. As Christians, we do things every day of our lives that make no sense to the people of the world that are watching us. In fact, we're weird. We're often criticized, persecuted, because what we think, what we feel, and what we do makes no sense whatsoever to the world who does not share our values. We try to live moral lives in an immoral world. We believe in kindness and civility in the midst of a society of vicious incivility. We reverence our bodies as heavenly gifts, while those around us to see it as a mere toy to be decorated and played with. And on we could go. Make no mistake about it. We make no more sense to the people of this world than that crazy flicker made to me. They think we're crazy. Well, you're not. They just don't see yet what drives you. But mark my words, they will. And those who have mocked, scorned, and persecuted will rue the day they ever did. Maybe this is a good time to just remind you one more time. If you like these stories and you would like to receive videos of these stories with pictures, with B-roll, and with music set to them, well, go to glennrawsonstories.com and sign up to receive these free stories. The story I just told you is one of those that will be released and sent out to all of the subscribers sometime in the next few months. But I would be very, very honored if you would sign up to receive those free stories. And I promise you, those stories are free. The books and other things cost money, but those stories are free. Now, over the course of this next year, I'm going to do a little of what I'm doing tonight. I'm going to talk about stories from history. I'm going to talk about modern stories of real people now and talk about pioneers. And I'm going to be sharing stories out of the scriptures. And this is one of them. Hang on just a sec. September 24th, 1834, Kirtland, Ohio. A council of 15 men presided over by Joseph Smith met to consider the doctrine of Christ for the government of the Church of Latter-day Saints, end of quote. A Scriptures Publication Committee was appointed that consisted of the first presidency. This was, as it were, no light task for these men. It was concluded that the doctrines of Christ, as revealed in this dispensation, be assembled in a new volume. And the revelations which have been given to the church up to that date, or in other words, all the revelations that have been given through the prophet Joseph Smith since the beginning, should be published. That was the decision. Less than 1 year later, August 17th, 1834, Oliver Cowdery arose with the newly published book in hand and called for a vote from the quorums of the church assembled. In the course of that sustaining, certain leaders spoke and bore their witness of the new book. Among them was John Smith, the uncle of the prophet Joseph. The minutes record that President John Smith arose and testified his joy that we have at length received the long wished-for document to govern the church in righteousness and bring the elders to see eye to eye. End of quote. He then testified that the revelations came from God. President Smith then called for the vote of his quorum that they, quote, would receive the book as the rule of their faith and practice and put themselves under the guidance of the same. End of quote. The vote was unanimous. And so it went through every quorum down to the deacons themselves until finally a vote was called from the General Assembly of the Saints. And the vote carried, and the new book, newly canonized, was received as Scripture. And thus, my dear friends, the Doctrine and Covenants of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was born. The first 70 pages in that first Doctrine and Covenants, the text was the Lectures on Faith, which I'll talk more about later, which contained, as it was reasoned at the time, the doctrines of the church. Following that in the volume were the revelations received by Joseph Smith that contained the covenants or commandments of the saints, of God to the saints of the last days. In short, the book was the Doctrine, Lectures on Faith, and Covenants or Commandments, meaning the revelations. It was and is that volume meant to govern the Church of Christ and bring us all to see eye to eye with the Almighty. Now, this next year, as part of our Come, Follow Me curriculum, we will be studying the Doctrine and Covenants and church history. I will be talking more about that in every devotional going forward, about the development of those revelations and of early beginnings of church history. If you would like to read more or watch more on church history, go to historyofthesaints.org and you can get not only the podcasts that I talked about, but you can get television shows, documentaries, and books galore that teach the origins of Latter-day Saint church history. That's historyofthesaints.org. Now, continuing on. In September 1830, 20-year-old Chapman Duncan left his home in Barnett, New Hampshire, bound for South America. He was suffering from what was called at the time consumption, which oftentimes was tuberculosis, and he determined that he would go south, way south, for his health. The route that Chapman chose to go to get there was to travel to Cincinnati, Ohio, and from there, journey south through the river systems all the way to New Orleans. While journeying on the Ohio Canal, he became so ill that he was confined to his bed. somewhere near Louisville, Kentucky. He was lying awake in his bed when he records the following experience. Quote, "It appeared as though a man spoke, yet I heard no audible voice. It was a quiet, peaceable, yet sure impression. In fact, I knew that the Lord or an angel spoke to me. This is the message he bore to me," still quoting, "Thou shalt prosecute thy journey no farther south than the mouth of the Ohio River. If you do, you shall die." Chapman continued, "I looked to see the personage. I saw none. I began to meditate upon what I had heard and the feeling that pervaded my person. And while thinking, I cannot say whether it was 5 minutes or more, the Spirit again spake and said further, quote, "If thou wilt go to the place of gathering of my people, thou shalt live." End of quote. End of quote. Chapman said, "The force of the message rested so heavily upon me that I dared not go farther south and turned my course for St. Louis, Missouri." Well, Chapman became discouraged when he could see no way that he was going to get to St. Louis, Missouri. He called on the Lord in prayer. Right after that, he saw 2 men standing on the wharf. He felt impressed that he should go talk to them. Turned out, one of those men was Elder Philo Dibble, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Chapman later recalled, quote, "My soul was filled with joy to think the Lord would make plain the way for me to do His commandments and place means within my reach as He did right there." End of quote. Chapman Duncan set out for Independence, Missouri in November 1830, driving a wagon for Philo Dibble. He spoke of the warm welcome he received when he arrived in Independence, Jackson County. After listening to the doctrine of Christ, the teachings of the elders, and getting somewhat acquainted with the new-made friends, for he said, "They took me in," Chapman said, "I joined the church. I think the last of December, baptized by Elder Titus Billings on the Sabbath day, confirmed by Bishop Edward Partridge and council. In a short time," he continues, "the Holy Ghost fell upon me, and I did speak with new tongues and prophesy, and I thanked the name of my Redeemer." And from that point forward, Chapman Duncan cast his lots with the saints. He lived to be 88 years old and passed away in Caneville, Wayne County, Utah. I love that story. So many times in the studying of pioneer history, I find the intervention of angels and remarkable revelatory experiences that led these pioneers to find the faith against all opposition and be baptized. Now, I know that there have been, perhaps there are now, those watching these devotionals, listening to these stories, who are either not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or they have a lot of questions and would like to learn more about the basic doctrines. Well, I want to tell you, my son is a full-time missionary, and he and his companions are authorized to teach on Facebook at facebook.com/LTW or Light the World Arden Arcade. Annie will put that link into the notes. And if any of you would like to talk to the missionaries, you can talk to my son and his companions on Facebook, and they will answer those questions for you. But if you are not a member of the church and you're here, welcome. And I hope you have many friends while you're here. Continuing on. The story is told by the descendants of I can't say that name, Gustavus and Eunice Perry, of a dark, stormy night, probably early in the year 1830, in the region of Lewis, Essex County, New York. According to the record, the work was done for the day on the Perry farm. The family was gathered in their kitchen. Their front door opened and a stranger entered the room. Now the family was sitting around the fireplace. They spoke of him coming from the kitchen towards them. As he entered the room, he was an old man with a long, flowing white beard. The family noted that even though it was a rainy, stormy night, you guessed it, there were no signs of rain on him. The old man blessed them in the name of the Lord and asked for food and lodging for the night, both of which were generously given. Somewhere in those first moments, the old man took a pack from his shoulder, opened it up, and pulled out a puppy, which he gave to the children to play with. Later that evening, he took from his pocket a book from which he began to read, telling them that it was soon to come forth and telling them, the Perry family, to get one at their first opportunity. Well, the next morning, the stranger mysteriously disappeared. No footprints, no sign of him. None of the neighbors saw him go, even though it was open daylight. Now, not too long after that, 2 elders from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints came into the area, Essex County, New York, preaching the Book of Mormon. The family obtained one, and in reading the book, they recognized the passages of Scripture the stranger had read to them on the night of his visit. In the year 1832, the Perry family joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. From that point forward, where the church went, the family of Gustavus and Eunice Perry was there. Eventually, they would settle in what would be known as Perry, Utah. Their second great-grandson, L. Tom Perry, was a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Whenever I hear these kinds of things, these kinds of stories, I am reminded of the importance of little decisions and their grand effect on the future. Your decisions now, yours and mine, to keep the faith and stay the course and stay on the covenant path and be good, be kind, and be courageous in keeping the faith, those decisions now, even though it seems to make no difference to anyone else, can, will, and surely must have an impact on your posterity for generations to come. Continuing on. I've talked about this fellow before, but he is a great one. Israel Barlow was born in 1806 in Massachusetts and baptized a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1832. He marched with Zion's Camp in 1834 and was among those driven from far west Missouri in late 1838. Israel Barlow was one of the first to investigate the area that would later come to be known as Nauvoo. Israel was a trusted friend and a bodyguard of the prophet Joseph Smith. According to family records, in 1844, Joseph Smith requested Israel to take an errand of delivering a message to a brother who lived among those hostile to the church in Illinois. Israel was asked to, quote, make special observations of what he might see and hear while on this mission, end of quote. The prophet further told Israel to leave on this errand on a certain day, early in the morning and ride to a certain man's home and there deliver the message. He was instructed to accept of their hospitality, which the prophet Joseph assured him they would extend to him. But, quoting now, said Joseph, let them put your horse up for you and eat supper with them. But when it becomes sundown, saddle your horse and leave. They will be insistent and try to persuade you to remain overnight. But if you value your life, do not stay, but leave and listen to the direction of the Spirit. End of quote. Well, Israel undertook the journey on the day set forth. Indeed, he found the man hospitable, just as Joseph had said, and the man did insist that Israel stay the night, but obedient to the prophet, Israel departed at sundown for home. Quoting now, just before he came to the river bridge, a voice said to him, ride faster. He sped up his horse, and the voice repeated again and with more emphasis, ride faster. And again he increased the speed of the animal when the voice said to him, ride for your life. He then sped for all the animal's strength. As the horse's feet clattered across the bridge, he could hear a mob which had gathered in the brush to intercept him, cursing at the top of their voices. He had crossed the bridge but a short distance when the voice said to him again, turn to the right. Israel wheeled his horse off the road into the brush toward the river, and there he stood in silence as the mob, who had laid in wait, had mounted their horses and came racing over the bridge at breakneck speed after him, and down the road they went, pursuing him. After they had gone by, Israel wound his way from the river's edge to the bed of the stream and on through the willows. In the darkness, he made his way along the river in the opposite direction from which the mob had expected him to go. Finally, when he thought he was safe, several miles away, he emerged from the river bottoms and made his way over the country back into Nauvoo, arriving just as the day was breaking. There he saw the prophet Joseph walking up and down the street in front of his home. As Israel approached and alighted from his horse, he began to tell the prophet of his experience. The prophet stopped him and told him he need not tell him, for he already knew. The prophet told him that he had been up all night waiting for Israel's return and stated, I saw it all. You have no need to tell me. End of quote. Thereupon the prophet laid his hand upon Israel's shoulder and gave him a blessing and said, quote, thee and thine shall never want. End of quote. I witness to you again, there are miracles in this church. And I also wanted to remind you one more time what's coming in 2021. History of the Saints, Dennis Lyman and myself, we will be publishing a new book. That story I just told you will be in it. It's titled, We Knew Him, Eyewitness Accounts of the Prophet Joseph Smith. That book is coming sometime in 2021. Okay, next story. The year was 1757. The place was Fort Edward, New York. Solomon Mack, a young man in his early 20s, had enlisted in the French and Indian War 2 years before and now found himself driving ox teams in the service of the Crown. His teams became lost, and he and a companion went through the forest over a dangerous trail in search of his valuable animals. Suddenly, Solomon found himself face to face with 4 armed and hostile Native Americans about 150 yards ahead. His traveling companion was about 100 yards behind him. Alone, now, facing enemies, but not witless, Solomon suddenly cried out in a loud voice, rush on, brave boys. We will have these devils. We'll have the devils." Solomon later recorded what happened next. Quote, "I had no other weapon, only a staff. But I ran towards them, and the other man, appearing in sight, gave them a terrible fright. And he said, I saw them no more. But I am bound to say the grass did not grow under my feet." Now, facing challenges head on came to typify Solomon Mack's approach to life. It was a legacy which he would pass on to his posterity. Late fall, 1827, 70 years later, Solomon Mack's grandson, Joseph Smith Jr., took a lesson from his revered grandfather. Having just obtained the gold plates of the Book of Mormon from the angel Moroni, mobs attempted at every devisable stratagem to get those plates from him. But Joseph had been commanded of Moroni to use every effort to keep them safe. Being warned that a mob might come, Joseph hid the plates beneath the hearthstones and secured them once more in place than a mob of armed men had stormed up and surrounded the house. Well, can you see the situation? Plates are supposedly hidden, but mobs surround the house. They want the plates, and they want them now. Thinking quickly, Joseph threw open the door of the house and, shouting as if he had an army at his command, ran from the house directly at the mob. Every man in the Smith household, including Joseph's 15-year-old brother, Don Carlos, took up the act and charged out with such fury upon the mob that it struck them with terror and dismay, and they fled before the little Spartan band into the woods. End of quote. So said Lucy Mack Smith. And the plates were safe again. It's amazing what you can do when you have faith, and faith leads to courage. Well, this next one is my last story for the night, and it comes from 1981. And a dear sister named Afton May, or Afton Day, I think it's Afton Day. She published this story, I believe either in the Ensign or the New Era. And I'm going to paraphrase from the story and tell you the experience as you contemplate your forthcoming New Year's resolutions. Here it is. Since we are looking at making resolutions for the new year, I hope this next story will be helpful and not detract. If it's discouraging, then I apologize in advance, but I love this story. Here you go. It was 11:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and after turning on the television to the Times Square celebration, Mom went out into the kitchen and, taking out a paper and pencil, wrote, New Year's Resolutions 1980. And then, oh, the lofty ideals that flowed freely from Afton's pen. She wrote, Number 1, I will supply my husband's wants and needs with a sweet spirit. Number 2, I will not become distraught with my children. Number 3, I will have my visiting teaching done by the 15th of each month. Number 4, I will lose 20 pounds. Well, about this time, her husband came through the kitchen on his way to the refrigerator. She tried to cover the paper, but he could tell what she was doing. Writing your resolutions, huh? Why not just get out the list you made last year? End of quote. Well, hurt, but undaunted, she continued. Number 5, I will not get behind on the laundry. Again, she was interrupted. this time by her 12-year-old son, also on his way to the fridge. He too had figured out what she was doing, and he said, "Making your New Year's resolutions, right, Mom?" "Well, I don't mean to interfere, but aren't they the same ones you wrote last year?" Well, Mom finished the list and attached it to the refrigerator with a magnetic tomato and joined her family for the celebration. Full of vigor and resolve, she was up early the next morning preparing food for the day. It wasn't long, New Year's Day, before her husband and son were completely absorbed in 3 different football games on 2 different television sets and a radio. Throughout the day, they surfaced only long enough to call out such things as, "Hey, Mom, we're out of corn chips," or, "Honey, do we have any more of that pie you made last Thursday?" By nightfall, she had delivered 6 ham sandwiches, 27 soft drinks, 2 bowls of potato chips, 1 drink of water, and a miscellany of crackers, cheese, and cookies. By day's end, her disposition was something less than sweet. The next day, she got up and fixed a special breakfast. Her son devoured a box of cereal instead. Her daughter, Kim, donned a new pair of designer jeans and a soft pink sweater to scrub the halls at school, while Carrie, her other daughter, who had received 2 new outfits and a pair of new shoes for Christmas, tearfully announced she had nothing to wear for school. Well, you can probably guess the rest. She gained 5 pounds within the next 2 weeks. The morning after her college psychology final, she was washing out socks and underwear by hand. And on January 29th, when she was asked to report her visiting teaching, she innocently asked, "Why are you calling me so early in the month?" In less than 16 days, she had broken every resolve behind the tomato. So she made a new list, and it read as follows. Number 1, I will stock the house with piles of sandwiches and gallons of milk and take my daughters to a movie on New Year's Day. Number 2, I will forgive my children when they drive me up a wall and hope that they will extend the same courtesy to me. Number 3, I will not ask to be released from being a visiting teacher. Number 4, I will not gain 20 pounds. And number 5, I will take my husband and my children on a tour of the house and show them where I keep the washer and dryer. And then she added a new one, and it read as follows. Number 6, I will appreciate what little progress I do make despite my shortcomings. My friends, so it should be with us. Life is hard enough. And there's already too much out there of guilt, despair, discouragement. If we are not our own friends, who will be? Be a little more gentle on yourself. Trust a little bit more in the Lord, who is mighty to save. Even, quote unquote, a helpless case and hopeless case like you and me. Thank you, and happy Sabbath to you, my dear friends. That comes from Ensign, January 1981, Afton Day. Now, I also wanted to mention to you that coming up in 2021, there will be another volume of stories like the one that I just shared with you. All right, we've come to the end of our devotional for tonight. I've been going long enough. I want to remind you one more time that History of the Saints podcasts are available now at anchor.fm/History of the Saints. 6 episodes are there now. The whole season will launch on January the 4th. Also, I would invite you to remember that these stories and so many more are available for free as an email subscription, weekly subscription at glenrawsonstories.com. And lastly, please continue to send in your stories, your own personal stories of faith, of courage, of inspiration, no matter what it is. As long as the story is true and you know it, send it in to me and let us share it with someone else. In the meantime, my dear friends, God is high in his heavens, but close to your heart. The Lord Jesus Christ is watching over you. He is with you. He is working with you. You are in his heart and you are precious. Keep the faith. Be strong and of a good courage, and I will see you this coming Wednesday, December 30th, 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time for another devotional and more stories. Thank you, good night, and God bless.